Yeah, I've been waiting for this.
Resident Evil Zero-REmake is going to be huge for Resident Evil. Now, Resident Evil Zero is the redheaded stepchild of the original Resident Evil games. It was inspired to share many mechanics with the Sweet Home survival horror game on the NES, which was said to be the precursor for the original Resident Evil. And yet, it's always looked at in a bad light when held next to its much more beloved franchise brethren. But now it's got its chance to shine. Although, if you ask me, it's always stood tall in the face of deprecation. But I digress. An overwhelming percentage of people who have played the game will tell you that they're better off skipping this one. But that's all about to potentially change. It's said to be getting a remake. Now, keep in mind that all this rigmarole is just speculation. Yep, that's right. All the babblings of a madman on the internet with some credibility under his belt. I'm of course talking about the one Dust Golem. If you've been plugged into the Resident Evil community at all, this name might be a little familiar to you. Now, that's no disrespect on Dust Golem. They've been pretty accurate before, but also not accurate at all. But not everything is to be believed that you read online. Shocker, I know. But everything moving forward is all based on the faith of someone not lying on the internet. Ooh. Well, with that being said, these leaks are pretty interesting, because if it is true, it could be insane for the Resident Evil franchise, and I don't think a lot of people are realizing that. So, what are the leaks, right? Well, if you've been living under a barrel, I'll give you the cliff notes. Now, leaker Dust Golem mentioned something in his series of tweets that really popped out to me. He claims that the production company, Constantine Films, holds the rights to make Resident Evil movies currently, but to keep those rights, they must release a new film every 5 years, since Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City came out in 2021. God, what a terrible name, by the way. Can I just say that? Who the fuck thought of Welcome to Raccoon City? That is an awful name for a movie. Like, it doesn't even roll off the tongue. Whatever. Anyway, their next movie, apparently being directed by Mr. Zach Greger, must hit theaters before the end of the 2026 fiscal year. At the same time, though, Capcom is gearing up for a Resident Evil Zero-REmake, which would be the perfect way to reintroduce fans to the beginning of the story that is Resident Evil. Now, with these leaks, some people are speculating that the franchise's 30th anniversary has something to do with this, as it is fast approaching, and a new Nintendo console is on the horizon. Now, some might think that this could be an ideal moment for Resident Evil Zero to make a big splash across multiple platforms, but I personally find this to be highly unlikely. You have to remember, Resident Evil Zero originally came out on the GameCube exclusively, and that didn't sell too well, and we all remember how that deal went down. However, Resident Evil 9 is also said to be in development and is rumored for a 2026 release, celebrating both the beginning and ending of the saga with Resident Evil Zero and Resident Evil 9 respectively, a new live-action film, and possibly even a CG movie like they did with Death Island. Now, this hypothetical coordinated push could mark a defining moment for the franchise, shaping its future while also honoring its legacy. The big question is now is how Capcom chooses to align these releases. If they pull it off, 2026 could be one of the most monumental years in Resident Evil history. But that's just all a wet dream of a fanboy. But like I said, there is technically no proof of any of this yet, and it is all just speculation. But this isn't what I wanted to address. No, I want to talk about the thing that is more than likely to be real, and that's the barrage of remakes that Capcom wants to throw at its legacy fans. Oh yeah, I want to talk convicted felons and hook shots, baby! Now, a Resident Evil Zero-REmake has huge potential, and it actually holds a lot more significance to the current canon and the state of the franchise on its shoulders. I'm gonna use some interesting snippets from Dusk's tweets to support my claims here. Not that he's the one-all be-all for Resident Evil stuff, but I do agree with what he said here. A Resident Evil Zero-REmake has the potential to elevate its characters and its villains in a way that the original never fully explored. At its core, Resident Evil Zero follows Rebecca Chambers, a young medic devoted to saving lives and eager to help those in need, and then there's Billy Cohen, a convicted murderer en route to death row. Initially on opposing sides, they're forced into an uneasy alliance to survive. Keep in mind, the Resident Evil remakes have leaned into deeper character-driven storytelling, and Resident Evil Zero offers one of the most dramatic duos in the series, making it a prime candidate for reimagining, especially since it's garnered so much flack for its core gameplay mechanics and shoehorned story, as well as its forgettable supporting cast. One of the biggest missed opportunities in the original was its villain, James Marcus, and a little bit of you, Billy. While his backstory, being betrayed by Albert Wesker and William Birkin, and then resurrected through a hive mind of leeches, I never really felt he quite reached his full potential as a compelling antagonist, especially for someone who kicked off the entire Resident Evil franchise. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have any of these other stories. Now the leeches, driven by grief and vengeance, could be reimagined as a truly haunting and tragic presence, perhaps even a persistent stalker-type enemy like Mr. X or Nemesis, since Capcom has become a really big fan of those lately. And this was technically the case in the original original game too, but it always felt as if the enemy was a separate, weird standoffish enemy and not an omnipotent boss type. Additionally, Capcom could somehow incorporate the fusion of the Leech Queen and James Marcus to their advantage. A remake could rework this by leaning into the idea of monsters becoming more human rather than a human turning into a monster and questioning its existence, and dealing with that whole existential dilemma. It would be a sharp contrast to the game's staple of humans becoming monsters. Now, Wesker and Birkin also have some untapped narrative potential here. The irony of Birkin betraying James Marcus, only to later suffer a similar fate, could be emphasized to show his transformation from an awkward, ambitious scientist into the monster fans know and hate. Meanwhile, Wesker's role could be expanded significantly, tying into his greater arc into the series as a mastermind behind everything, instead of just sitting on the sidelines and watching a screen like in the original. Damn, Wesker, how many gigahertz you get on that thing? A remake could integrate him into the events in a more meaningful way, possibly even with playable segments that foreshadow his later rise, or even connect him to potentially future remake installments. Perhaps ones fans have been begging for, Capcom? Wink wink, nudge nudge. Personally, I'd like to see his escape scenario from Umbrella Chronicles make a post-game appearance here, maybe as a rewardable game mode such as the Ghost Survivors from RE2 Remake or Separate Ways DLC from RE4 Remake. To expand on that a little bit, Resident Evil Zero Remake could better connect to the larger Resident Evil lore, incorporating elements from later games like RE5, Resident Evil Village, and Code Veronica by fleshing out Umbrella's origins and refining its narrative themes that later call back to RE0. A remake could potentially turn the Epileptic Express saga into a pivotal chapter in the franchise, which I really freaking like. One that truly feels like the beginning of the Resident Evil story, rather than just a side story which a lot of people missed the chance to explore or even were unaware of. I personally love Resident Evil Zero for what it was trying to do. I also think that this gives an opportunity to change a lot of the gripes that most fans have with the original game, like the addition of item boxes instead of just chucking items on the floor like a heathen, or maybe changing the way characters are swapped in-game or doing away with the zapping system as a whole, and instead incorporating an A scenario and B scenario for the main duo like they did for Resident Evil 2 Remake. It'd be pretty cool to see Rebecca's side of the story and Billy's side of the story separately, but that would also mean that they would have to change the story a lot. Like a lot. Additionally, they could just try doing the duo system again like they did in Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil Revelations 2. This could somehow play into what could eventually evolve into the partner system for the highly speculated Resident Evil 5 remake. I mean, come on, right? Like, they're totally gonna remake Resident Evil 5. Although the latter seems unlikely. I could honestly see them just overhauling the zapping system as a whole and make it more modern friendly. Imagine playing a Resident Evil game where you have essentially two playable campaigns to switch between throughout the entire main story. Sort of like what they did in the original, but a little bit more polished, where you could switch between characters. But before any of that, I think we agree. Code Veronica X needs a remake before Resident Evil 5. Hell, it deserves it more than Resident Evil 0. But I'm just the guy who's complaining about it on the internet. What do y'all think though? Are you guys stoked for a Resident Evil 0 remake? Do you think it deserves a remake? Let's talk about it in the comments because I love talking Resident Evil. Other than that, that's all I got. Thanks guys for watching. I'm out.